Hi everyone, and welcome to our second webinar instalment of 2021. Today's session is hosted by Principal Design here at Innovate, Matt Hobbs, titled Designing for Change in the Ever-Evolving Financial Space. So as we all know, the financial sector is one that's gone through enormous change in the last 10 years or so. It has been shaped and defined by designers and developers embracing new technologies and driving the way we bank today. Matt's going to outline how designers can stay on top in this ever-evolving arms race to innovate in the financial sector, the common challenges designers face, and how we can use design thinking processes to support this sector. Please get involved and say hello to each other in the chat. Please make sure you've switched your chat settings to panelists and attendees so everyone can see your messages. And do let us know if there are any issues with the stream. Please ask lots of questions using the Q&A box. I'll be trying to get through as many of these at the end. And we'll also be sharing the recording as soon as possible after the session today. We are using Rev for our auto-generated captions. These are quite accurate, but they do sometimes get some of the words muddled. So when we make this session publicly available on our YouTube channel, we'll make sure these are all tidied up. So yeah, without further ado, I will hand over to Matt to kick things off.
Cheers, Henry. Well, thanks everyone for joining. As Henry said, I'm going to be talking about designing for change in the ever-evolving financial space. So I'll be looking at why I think this is an important area to be talking about at the moment, covering how we got to today's landscape. So what change means, what is changing and why that is. So I'm going to trying to discuss what is driving change and how we as designers can design to support change, share how we can approach design and the benefits of design thinking. So talking through some examples to show value of design. And this is all going to be from a designer's perspective, as that's my sort of key focus and role within Innovate. But hopefully this will show you how designers are then one part of a larger collaborative effort. My idea is just to provoke questions and thoughts about user needs within the sector, and just raise questions about how the future of banking could be designed. So a little bit about me. I'm Matt, Principal UX Designer at Innovate, and I've got 10 years experience across brand, digital and UX. I've personally worked at agencies all of my career so far, and each of them specialising in their own respective areas, but that's given me a fair amount of exposure over the time that I've had in the industry, and I've been fortunate enough to work on projects where I've been seconded as well. So part of that was living over in Amsterdam and working across Europe with Liberty Global, so embedding myself in their sort of culture as well. And this has given me some exposure to internal challenges and mindsets and goals of different internal teams. And that's really helped when working with companies recently, such as Virgin Money and Development Bank Wales. So there's a lot of change happening at the moment. We've all been living through change in the last year, yet we can see change as an opportunity. And that's kind of what I want to share with you today. So what does change actually mean? So change is to make different, but to make different in a particular form is to alter. And to make radically different is to transform, and to change from one to the other is to shift. So there's many different meanings to change. So for argument's sake, it could be to tweak a transactional journey, or it could be a bank undergoing full digital transformation. You'll see many variations of change in the financial sector. The other thing about change is it can be infinite. So products, services, and companies are consistently evolving. Initially, banks were branch focused and some are to store value. They used money to make money, and there was less focus kind of on the user needs, putting the bank's goals first, but that's changing within banks. They're looking to focus more on user need to fight for differentiation within a crowded marketplace. But what does this mean for banks going forward? So something that really got me thinking about the importance of this topic is this great TED talk on how FinTech is shaping the future of banking. And within it, there's a stat, and it goes, in 2016, it was estimated that 30 to 50% of jobs will be lost over 10 years in the financial sector due to FinTech. And that's quite a scary number of job losses. But when thinking about it, that loss will also create, and these jobs will then be within FinTech. And these jobs will also need a different skill set. So when we're looking at that skill set, it's creatives, user researchers, experienced specialists and programmers. They will have more involvement in defining the banking solutions of the future. And it doesn't matter if it's a large bank or a small startup, but just the overall focus is changing. Challenger banks changing the blueprint that was set out for banking many years ago. So it's a really exciting time to be a designer in this period. There's more opportunity now to create experiences in the financial sector that people really like to use. So change is happening faster than ever. It's inevitable, but it's also good. We're at a point in time where technology advancements are just normality. Something new now won't necessarily be new in 6 months. And we may not see major advancements like when the iPhone was introduced all too often, but change is still happening. And designing for change, in my opinion, is about being ready for change. It's about being susceptible to changes that will happen. Change pushes boundaries and it continues to iterate and innovate. So what is changing? Why is it changing? And how do we design for change? Well, I just want to start by looking at the what. Some of the key trends that we see changing the financial sector are, digitization. More products and services today are becoming digitized. Users are seeking lower friction and immediacy. And this has also then led to an increase in customer expectation. There's an expectation of easy, anytime, anywhere service as standard. And that's fast and hassle-free transactions, which have just become the normality today. There's also rising competition. So today's market's full of competitors and potential partners hoping to get in on that digital wave. They're forming new products and modernizing current financial services. And there's also more emphasis on corporate responsibility than there ever has been before. Societies around the world now expect banks to help address things like income equality, racial and gender inequality, as well as climate change. This is also in addition to helping allocate or redirect capital towards economic activities that are positive to society. And finally, there's sort of been a rethink in the concept of money. So newer technologies are heralding this quiet revolution. It's questioning the conventional economic value offered by the banking and financial services. So just to put all of this into context, I'm going to just take it back to where it started. I think it's important to build empathy for the journey that the banks have been on so far, to understand why things are the way they are and what decisions led to that. So the foundations of banking have been instilled over time from the Romans through the Middle Ages and during Renaissance Italy. The first known bank account originated around about 1800 BC, and the concept grew around being able to exchange goods with items of equivalent value. It was a centralized, trusted place to exchange and store items. In the 1800s, banking for everyone became more apparent. What was seen as a luxury for the rich was opened up to the poorest in society, giving them the ability to take control of their financial futures through savings. And this was the birth of the savings account as we know it, as we see it today. And this then spread across the Western world. Interestingly, the first accounts used written card-based systems. The card was filled out with your name in the form of account record. And this is one of the reasons you couldn't easily move from one branch to another without opening a new account. It just wasn't easily transferable. So then the 1900s brought increase in transactional demands. Mainframes were introduced to keep up with demand, and this is where technology really started driving change. Account numbers had to be introduced for the mainframe to process records, but this is kind of a bit closer to how we're recognizing accounts today. And then, so if we look at the introduction of the internet in the 90s, that supported a self-service era. ATMs were introduced to give the users ability to get money out. This was time saving and you didn't have to interact with anyone to get money. But also one of the main benefits was cost saving. Less people needed to be employed for this purpose of getting money out now. And then if we look at the 21st century, so closer to where we are now, it brought banking anywhere 24/7. So the concept of digital wallets, banking anywhere, anytime, with extended connectivity from things like smartphones and mobile data. At a lot of these stages, design was done for the moment and predominantly for the bank. There were technology advancements and problems or issues that needed reacting to. Problems or things they were solving were, things like how can the bank save money? How can they make things more efficient? The user need was a lower priority than it is now. So where does that leave us today? Well, the financial sector is under more pressure than ever. The lines are blurring across industries. So if we look at tech and retail as an example of this, tech companies such as Apple have introduced their own financial services. So Apple Wallet, Apple Pay, and now the credit card over in the US. And then you've got the likes of Facebook who are looking to create its own crypto asset. But then you've also got retail businesses doing the same. So Sainsbury's and M&S, for example, have their own banking, lending, and insurance products. The main point here is that they have their own capital today. They're not as reliant on financial businesses for support. They can get their own their customers' money when it's more convenient for them, rather than the need for it right now. So these sectors are all having a push and pull on each other, and more sectors are now defining how things could be done in the future. So just to touch on everything I've just gone over, the banking space has been changing, evolving ever since its conception, and this is due to the changing demands on the system. The current makeup of the system has been defined by advancements in technology and iteration on traditional banking models. Online journeys have been created in a digital space to mimic interactions that we are used to. So when the iPhone came along, a representation of a bank account was put on a phone. This means it hasn't necessarily been thought through from a complete user-centric or first principles perspective up until more recently. So there's been a collective realization of the need to evolve. And I don't mean tweak how a user logs into a banking app. I mean, there's a larger evolutionary shift that we're living through. Challenger banks are championing the experience of banking, challenging the fundamentals set out years and years ago, shaping the way we think about banking moving forward. It's changing the user perspective and expectation. So if we were to look at why and what is driving and affecting that change, there's changing attitudes in relationship to money. The digitization of products and services are pushing behavioral change. Just as customers are more comfortable with online shopping, they are also becoming more comfortable with digital wallets, accessing money on the go, and becoming less reliant on human interaction to manage their finances. So if we take transactions, for example, the pandemic has led to an aversion towards using cash. People don't want to touch money at the moment, and shops don't want to accept it. And this has led to an increase in contactless transactions. Investment platforms are more accessible than ever, influencing a rise in the retail investor. And these are users that want to manage their assets on the go. Younger generations have a digital first mindset. For example, they want to send money to friends easily while out and about getting coffee. There is just a movement towards fully digital banking for those that are able to use it. Institutions are adopting, embracing new technology. Speed of change is faster than ever, and it's on a bigger scale than it's ever been before. So emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence, 5G, big data capabilities, and blockchain are having a heavy influence on the future direction of the financial sector. And I think this leads on nicely to digital disruptors who are bringing huge competitive pressures to the financial market. This is, in my opinion, one of the biggest accelerators to digital transformation. So challenger banks such as Monzo have shown banks they need to adapt because they're far ahead in the development of functionality, and it left other banks scrambling to catch up. If we take RBS, for example, they had to shut down their digital-only offering only 6 months after it was released, showing just how competitive the market is and the ruthlessness if you don't get it quite right. Investing is also changing. So the rise of investment platforms such as Trading 212, eToro, and Robinhood are lowering the barrier to entry into the stock market. The phrase generation stock has been coined, referring to the newer wave of retail investor today. And these apps are changing the way today's generation save by allowing them to take on more risk easier. Disruptors have supported in defining how digital businesses look today. So what do they look like? Well, they're collaborative. Every member in the organization is meaningfully involved in achieving a shared vision. This requires a shift away from traditional business structures and hierarchies, promoting a stronger culture within an organization. They're also agile, so it's not a project with a start and end date. Technology will continue to evolve and call for adaptations to current processes, which means you need to keep learning and evolving to promote innovation. Digital businesses are also making use of the latest technologies. So if we look at the adoption of mobile services and cloud-based technology, it's changing the way we conduct business. And finally, they're adopting a more data-driven culture. getting better understanding of their customers and their behaviours, enabling them to become a more customer-centric organisation. So this is just kind of what's expected of a business today, and it's become a lot more prevalent over the last year of how we're all working in the pandemic times. So another big driver for change is a change in company structure or process. So mergers, acquisitions, or joint ventures are a point where companies have a bit more leverage to change. With changes like these, you may have to consider that management consultants will be trying to find change. You'll also have employees that want to define change, and then you'll have the customer who's demanding change. It's about supporting all of these needs. So within that, legacy systems may not work with new incoming systems. Change can bring a lot of cost savings, and it can reduce technical debt. Or if we look at brands being merged, if one part of the bank is bringing a brand and the other part is bringing a built solution, then that solution would need to be reworked slightly to then be fit for purpose. An introduction of new teams enhances internal skill sets. So adding an in-house UX design function really ramps up capability. And this is just becoming more and more common today. And the final thing just to touch on is global events force change. So as I've touched on already, the pandemic has accelerated change. Business is being conducted more remotely than ever in our history. People are spending less on different things. Transactions are predominantly contactless. Less people are using branches than ever before. The world has seen another big push towards digitization, and coronavirus has shown that we can all adapt to it. Brexit is also affecting our lives, changing regulation and affecting things like taxes. So it's things like these that we'll always need reacting to that force change. So why is it changing? Ultimately, there is a need for banks to adapt to survive. This is due to increasing technical capability, digital disruption, and global events. This is all influencing behavioural change and evolving user need. And this is where we as creatives can really help shape the modern future of banking. So just before I talk about how we design for change, what is it we're actually designing for? Well, banking's core products are the ability to store value, move money, and access credit. And these will cover products in banking, saving, investing, and lending. I think it's important to keep these simplistic concepts in mind when designing for financial services. Keeping the simplicity when thinking about the user need will really help when defining an effective solution. So if we think about those core products and how they relate to user need, nobody wants to use a mobile banking app just for the sake of using it. Banks are a means to an end for the user. So the user need is to manage their finances effectively to meet other needs in their life. So how do we effectively design for change? How can designers stay on top of this ever-evolving arms race to innovate in the financial sector? What are those common challenges, and how can we use design thinking processes to support that? Well, when designing for change, taking a human-centered design approach will help support the creation of meaningful, effective experiences. It's a proven differentiator between successful products and services, and it tends to lead to a higher level of usability and overall experience. But what is a human-centric design approach? Well, it's about understanding people, their needs, constraints, contexts, behaviors, and wants. But simply, it's a framework that puts the human firmly at the center of a problem-solving process when designing products or services. Building this understanding about the user gives us empathy for their needs. This in turn helps us to design solutions that will make the most meaningful impact. So what I mean by this is we have to consider everyone that we're designing for. So let's look at age groups as an example of this. Not everyone is comfortable using smartphones, which affects mobile banking solutions. And this defines how we could treat content to support customers' needs when designing. Customers also don't care about how the solution is built or how we got there. They just want what they like and what works for them. It's also important to understand and empathize with the business when crafting solutions. So driving change in a bank is really difficult. Financial institutions have many moving parts. If we're aware of the challenges we'll face, then we can support this in our design process. This will help us in the design being comfortable with change. So what I mean by this is what was once isolated products in different buildings is now being brought together in one space. But it's likely to change beyond what we're aiming for now further in the future, and that's okay. Some of the challenges you might see are, different areas of the businesses running at different paces. they will implement changes on different timelines. And this could be because of capability or just the resource available to them. Management consultants will look to align timelines, while employees will try to effect changes that support their roles moving forward. There could be resistance at some points during the process, and that's due to large amounts being previously invested in systems and solutions. Systematic changes cannot just be uprooted and scrapped. We need to have careful consideration to be taken when challenging systems that have just become legacy architecture. And then the banking industry also works on customers' trust. And banks need security that changes that won't affect us too much. There's also change surrounding how we bring products and processes to people that are not newly minded. But challenges provide us with opportunity. Understanding user needs and business tension points will help define a realistically tangible solution. This is also where designers can get involved to influence these decisions, focusing on those user needs. Connecting multiple streams of work and platforms that support digital journeys will create better overall experiences. And working across multiple areas of the business will help transcend organizational silos. So think of product, digital, and marketing teams all talking together. This will only benefit the product. It's a chance to embed culture and process from the beginning. So if you take Nationwide as an example, they've set up their own digital design function within the last sort of 5 years or so. And it takes time to see the value that this team will bring, but now they're in a position where the value is being seen and talking about how to take that value into other teams like the core proposition team. So experience tells us that as designers, we tend to assume things are well organized. In reality, they're a lot more complex. There are usually multiple different systems all talking to each other, and there'll be legacy processes and compliance protocols in place that we have to work with. What we tend to do is take our experience, apply it to a problem, and then come up with a solution. And this is where design thinking comes in to support that. It's a method to back up these processes that we go through, focusing on building empathy for the user. So it starts with understanding. So that's building it, that's empathizing through observing and engaging with the user's behaviors in the context of their lives. And then it's defining our point of view so that we can then tackle the correct challenges. It then moves on into exploration, where ideation is there to concentrate on idea generation. These ideas can then move into prototyping, where iteration starts to generate artifacts. The final step in the process is materialization, where prototypes move into testing to form natural and honest feedback, and iteration then happens at all steps, feeding back into the process to form the final implemented solution. So what are the benefits of design thinking? Well, 3 concrete benefits are, like I've already touched on, it's human-centered, and it focuses on that mindset fully. It also adopts a you show and don't tell mindset, so it makes insights visual rather than you focus on hypothetical assumptions. And it's divergent. Design thinking starts by being divergent and explores a problem before you go into implementation. Divergent thinking allows us to use uncertainty in a constructive manner. It's worth, though, being aware that this process is likely to make people feel uncomfortable and challenged. It will take people out of their comfort zone. It involves talking about innovation blockers that could arise from within a company. And it needs to be seen as a cultural shift, embedded at the heart of a business and not a process. So a business has to have willingness to change and adopt new ways of working that make people feel uncomfortable if they haven't been exposed to it before. So part of the understanding journey is empathy. So if we were to understand key pain points through the different methods of research, such as user interviews, workshops, and observation, we may find common growing points or niche blockers. And they could be like, why does a user have to re-enter their details when applying for a new product? If the system has that data, why isn't the process already streamlined? Is this blocking users from applying for multiple products due to just the extra effort then required? You may find the user thinks banks don't understand what they want. By cross-selling irrelevant products, the user may get frustrated that you're not understanding their personal needs. And this just could be down to that they're used to targeted advertising today. Understanding pain points will lead to designing a better experience by breaking down the barriers in understanding and helping support the overall user need. Understanding pain points will allow us to define principles that consistently run through the design to address issues like these. And this will lead to a more trusted design when it's being adopted by customers, even if a lot of that is within the subconscious. It comes back to users knowing what they like. All too often, you don't hear about a really nice experience, but you certainly do hear when a customer is having a problem with one. So when defining these principles, we want to think about questions such as what attributes of a physical bank might still need to be in a digital space? How do you build trust into the experience? And what is it that's going to make a user want to use this service? So examples of that could be that to always use nudging and not force the user down paths, or it could be that the information is required to be on any device at any time, or just to always appeal to the user's emotion. Thinking about questions like this will help form design principles that run through the entire service, forming a more cohesive experience. So on the slide, I have two quick examples that I just found online, and I appreciate they might be quite small on screen, but the show and don't tell example is demonstrating how a deposit calculator is a great way to help users understand how returns will actually look. It takes into account complexities like regular monthly additions, and so context is being added to the user's decision so the user can form a better understanding. In the Don't Overwhelm Users version, on the right of it, focus is on adding a clear visual hierarchy. Any slight information overload can result in bigger cognitive load, so a visual hierarchy is really supporting the understanding of the information in this case. When thinking about designing a solution, think about coming at the problem, designing using first principles. First principles help us solve problems by avoiding generalities that can lead to poor decision making. It's very easy not to question assumptions about current solutions that we just feel are working. Products are being created just to keep up, ticking off functionality backlogs to keep up with the competition, and not focusing in on what the user really needs changing or what the delight is. Banking app functionality has got to a point of expectation, and anything below this is not seen as the norm now. But what if some of that was taken back to first principles? The WeChat app is a really good example of where first principles were used. So they were looking to enable the utility of payment within the experience. It's not a payment product, but simply through the introduction of a QR code scanned through the WeChat app, they've now supported over $12 trillion in mobile payment. And it's also important to understand what success looks like. Understanding the goal defines the approach and skill sets needed to be successful. For example, is the goal to support design rollout while businesses are merging? Or is it to create and brand a new proposition and take it to market? Or is it to create a centralized design system to support digital consistency? It costs a lot of money to support things that go wrong during a project, so understanding success will help you set the right path. Larger banks can learn a lot from how startups can operate. What helps startups is they don't have any legacy architecture. They don't have the baggage that larger companies do. This means they can set a vision, they can create a product from the ground up, focusing on user needs, and due to their size and ability, ability to be agile, they can easily push features to market. Startups also have more tolerance to failure. The customer base is usually smaller with startups. So for the likes of Monzo, early adopters had a digital mindset. They had a more forgiving, younger audience than the traditional bank would. The way Monzo has overcome some of these teething problems is with their publicly accessible backlog and then the beta testing within their app. It means users can see what functionality is coming up so they know what to expect, and working in this way enables them to bring new features to market in months or even weeks. So what roles can agencies play? What value can we bring to the table? Well, we are sometimes the glue that holds everything together. We are there to help affect and support change. Agencies bring value by being flexible and support the speed to market a lot of the time. Having flexible skill sets and the ability to bring on specialists at short notice is a benefit if the project requires it. Agencies can also bring a fresh perspective. There isn't clouded judgment from sitting with the same product for years that you might have. At Imensa, we've supported and designed for change on different levels. We've supported design rollouts, and we've helped define new product propositions that are then taken to market. We've also optimized online journeys and supported structural changes. Agency experience spans across many sectors as well, so it brings different ways of thinking through challenges that have been overcome elsewhere. An agency supporting a large corporation always forms part of a team effort, though. The process is collaborative. Working with stakeholders and employees that are embedded there, utilising their understanding of systems and their processes can be vital. Having empathy for the journey that they have been on and the challenges they have faced personally will ultimately support them in achieving their goals. So what is the value of creative design? There are multiple different strands to design that support change during a phase of digital transformation, such as brand creation of digital systems or illustration libraries. Design helps to set a vision. That tangible vision then feeds motivation, which drives towards achieving commercial goals. I think it's worth mentioning at this point, design isn't a natural process. People don't necessarily understand how we get to the finished article. So what are we testing when it comes to color palettes? What rules are we forming as we explore the brand in a digital space? These are just some of the types of things we're questioning and exploring on this journey. Design is also more than just a logo or font. Design is a culmination of many factors, such as brand, components, and UX patterns. When all aspects of design sing together, we can really create exciting, meaningful experiences that the user enjoys and remembers. This supports the overall brand image and drives solutions to the next level. So brand and illustration is about creating awe-inspiring experiences. A brand is more than a visual identity. A brand is a person's gut feel about a product, service, or organization. So you can see why the overall brand experience is important. It's a combination of the brand strategy, brand identity, and the online and offline experience. Illustration can then be used to elevate, humanize, and provoke feeling. So if we take a look at brand strategy, it's the emotional concept that you want to stand for. So if we look at Nike and Apple for a second, Nike doesn't stand for shoes. It stands for performance, whereas Apple isn't about electronics, it's about creativity. Brand strategy is about the purpose, values, promise, and positioning. So looking at Lloyds Bank, something a bit more relevant to the financial sector, it's a brand about supporting people, businesses, and the communities of Britain. It builds a sense of trust with the by your side tagline. Trust is a key thread to any financial service. People need to feel safe and secure where they put their money. And that's what Lloyds is achieving here. And with the addition of the timescale, it adds real depth to their brand proposition. So I just want to talk quickly about the Robin Hood rebrand that was done by Collins quite recently. They were about helping redefine a brand strategy and its expression. The rebrand encompasses identity design, so tone of voice, logo, color palette, but it also looks at communication, product application, content strategy, and messaging. So if we relate this back to design thinking, the insight that helped define the point of view was not just about making finance less difficult, but to make finance more engaging and understandable, and to do it in a way unlike anybody else. Imagine a future where everyone is able to participate in systems of wealth creation. What they've managed to achieve is an evolved, future-focused brand that balances a high-performance product experience with a more engaging, inspiring creative expression. Imaginative illustrations and bold information graphics are aimed at to be both evocative and instructive, and they've created visual metaphors to translate complicated topics such as ETFs, fractional shares, and bull markets. They've thought hard about making a more exciting but accessible brand. I think it's important in any branding exercise to make sure that it's consistently sustainable across the entire user experience. So by this, I mean the online and the offline. So on screen, in print, in the office, just an interaction you might have with someone in a call center. It forms a meaningful overall brand experience when everyone believes in the same values. Design systems have real value to any business, and especially in finance. They provide the foundation to a great experience. Depending on who you ask, a design system and design language might or might not be the same thing. But regardless, the important point here is that both system and language go beyond a simple pattern library. They have to include a set of rules and guidelines to give the included components structure and meaning. So a design system comprises of a library of design patterns, rules, and streamlined UX guidelines, all with a focus on web accessibility to be inclusive of any user that may interact with the system. More importantly today is we have a well-crafted and managed design system. So in the past, we may have been focusing on one particular journey within a design system, but now all too often, we are creating sales journeys that combine into onboarding processes so that the user is already familiar with their account section by the time they come to use it. It's consistency across these flows that will support the business in achieving its goals and where they will see the real value. And good examples that you can go and sort of take a look at online are the GovUK design system, Atlassian and Salesforce. Design systems support how the brand is brought to the customer, wherever they are, on the device they're on, whenever they need it. So whether that's home on a tablet or out about on a mobile. So on this slide, I've got two examples of templates from a design system that I've personally worked on. And what this demonstrates is just examples of how components such as headers, hero sections, and product lockups can form page templates. And then you can see that across desktop and mobile. We were creating a pan-European framework for how to sell telecom services in this example. With that needed flexible design system that could be easily rebranded to different European markets. So we were designing to support core UX principles, but with component flexibility. So, for example, when we were creating a library, we were doing it in English. But what you'll find a lot of time is that in English, the wording can be more concise. So when that was translated into Polish or German, the wording was a lot longer. The point here is to think about content early on. As designers, we tend to tweak designs to look the best they can, and then content can get retrofitted into that. So thinking content first is only going to strengthen the delivery of the end product. And when creating design systems, we can use customer expectation to our advantage. Design patterns are shareable across sectors. We don't always have to reinvent it. We can make use of reusable, tested UX design patterns for areas such as login, ad product, or user account, for example. This allows us to focus on moments of delight within the journeys we're looking at for the more bespoke problems that we might come across. So if we were to think about common patterns, like users today expect search functionality like Google, or a chat function like Facebook, or even maps like Airbnb. It's what we've gotten used to in this digital age. The design patterns just have become familiar, and they've set a benchmark in user expectation. And that's something we need to consider and then use to our advantage where possible. So an example of where we've supported similar outputs is our work with Virgin Money. And due to sensitivity, I can't share any finalized designs or anything like that. I've just put a brand slide up, but our role was to support the implementation of their rebranded design system in a digital service. Part of our role was testing how robust the system was and checking if it supported all scenarios across journeys, such as application flows. During the delivery, our team went through change itself. Our team needed to be flexible to adapt to the problem and delivery timescales. We needed to upscale halfway through to be able to support the delivery output required, and that was in the form of high fidelity designs to support every page in the journey ready for implementation. The value of a robust design system in this case was bringing the brand into an operational stage. The design system would reduce cost and design and build cost in the future through efficiencies achieved in the library. And this is where there is added value in the education of the artifacts we produce. One key thing about a design system is that it will flex over time. It needs to be managed as if it was a product itself because of its evolution. And this is where a governance strategy can really help. How do users of the system feedback and contribute? What if something within the design system isn't quite working? What if there isn't a component that supports a needed pattern? Think of ways to incorporate updates and feedback. Creation of backlogs, feedback loops, and update processes support the product's lifecycle. So a good example of where that's been implemented is the GovUK design system. So users of the system can contribute to it with the proposition of new components or patterns, or even the development of new components and patterns, and they've set out guidelines for this on the site. There's also a community backlog and roadmap. Users can see what functionality is coming up and what is being improved, and this helps to set expectation and then plan for the future. So if we look at the journey that we've just been on, using solid design thinking principles, focusing on human-centered design processes, supported by strong brand experience that's complemented by UX principles and a robust design system, we can support designing for change. Making sure everyone is on board and being brought along in the process helps to embed a new design culture within a business. It creates excitement when people see it coming together. So wrapping it all up, change is all of these things that I've been talking about. There are many different threads and variations to change. It's not simple, and it's always happening. Roles will change again in the future. FinTech companies will probably play more of a role in the front-end UI, whilst banks take control of the heavy lifting and back-end logistics. Technology and innovation will play an ever-increasing role as we progress further. The sector will probably focus more on user need as a differentiator. But what I hope you'll take away from this is that designing for change is about being susceptible to change. It's about being fluid and flexible. Our solutions will need to adapt over time to benefit the needs of the user. But keeping in mind those principles you set out with at the beginning, supported by a program of user testing or design thinking, will ultimately improve the quality of solution. So I just wanted to leave you with a final thought. Those who begin to shape the future of banking are not going to be your traditional bankers, but rather designers, programmers and creative thinkers designing journeys that support the overall user needs. I hope you found this subject thought-provoking and seeing the involvement creatives can have in the future of financial services. It's an exciting stage we're at, and we can support this direction as it goes into the future more. Thanks everyone for listening. I guess time for some questions if there are any.
Awesome, thanks Matt. Yeah, loads of really useful information in there. For everyone watching, please submit your questions in the Q&A box. I can see a few in there just coming in now. But Matt, kind of what I want to know is kind of what would you say is kind of the next biggest change that's on the horizon for the banking sector?
It's quite a tricky one to predict, because if you look at where we are now and what the likes of Monzo and that did for the industry, they really pushed that user-centered design concept forward, and we're focused on that user need. But what happened is that left other banks now trying to catch up, and that gap is being closed. So what was once, say a few years back, more unique is less unique now. So I think with the addition of new technology and such things like blockchain and things like that, it's what is the next unique aspect that's going to take users by surprise and what they really like and need. Banks still need to make money at the end of the day, but the addition of freezing credit cards now on, say, Barclays or Santander or somewhere like that, because it was already done by Monzo, it doesn't mean people are going to flock over to that bank. So it's going to be competition within the marketplace for the fight for the user's attention. And whoever can find that next spark, I think, is where it will go, but we don't quite know where that will be.
Awesome, thank you. So we have a few questions here. So the first question we have from Anonymous is asking if you could provide an example on how kind of rethink the concept of money is influencing design is influencing design decisions.
Not necessarily where it's influencing design decisions right now, but it's potentially where it will go in the future, and that's things like the introduction of blockchain and how that gets adopted within the sector. So if you look at the blockchain as it's a decentralized system, it's changing the way that people are thinking of banks now, and actually whether banks adopt that or not. I know there are banks looking into it, but predominantly how we then design for that might be different. I'm not sure on what that would be or how we would do that, but that's the kind of what I mean by changing rethinking the concept of money. There's also things about people managing assets now rather than just financial or just money. People have investments, they have capital, they have assets, everything like that, and it's just there's been a bit of a shift in mindset to what is seen as your value, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. We have another question here kind of on that kind of similar vein, asking if you think that banks are going to disappear with the spread of cryptocurrencies and kind of blockchain.
It comes back to that, banks needing to adapt to survive. I don't think banks will disappear because they do support a lot of things like mortgages, credit, things like that, certain things that crypto can't necessarily do at the moment. But it might become that they adopt crypto as a way of being able to do certain things. This is all speculation at the moment. We don't know what that could be, but personally, I don't think banks will disappear. They're too embedded in our society for that, but certain banks would fall behind potentially if they don't keep up with trends that are going on. And I think it's about staying on top of those trends.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we're seeing kind of, branches get closed down, like
Yeah.
physical banks, I suppose. So, and there's a question here asking if they'll disappear. But I mean, yeah, I'd be surprised if I saw them disappear, I suppose. But obviously,
I think we'd all have big problems if they disappeared.
yeah. Awesome. So yeah, next question we have from Christina, who's asking about how the expectation of security and privacy has changed over time.
It's an interesting question, that, because if you look at the focus, say 10 years ago when the iPhone was only just introduced, people weren't as aware of data sensitivity and that they are now, but people were also more cautious about using things online. Like if I looked at my parents who, saw the industry change, they were always more cautious about using online services or putting your payment details into gateways or whatever. But now it's just a fact of the way we work. You look at the new generation coming through, they're just used to it. They've grown up with it. They don't really question it as much. So I think security is one of those things. It needs to be fully embedded in the background, and security is getting better and better and better as it goes today. But there's been a bit of a shift in mindset toward it, and I think people are less scared of it. Although, when data leaks happen or things like that, it puts another big emphasis that people start to panic on it. But I think, on the data sort of security side of things, people are more worried about their personal information from the likes of Facebook and things like that than they are in necessarily banking. So it's an interesting question, and something that, we'll see happen, see more things happen over the next, few years, especially.
Awesome, thank you. I think we've got time for one more. One or two more maybe. So we have one question from Salome, who's asking, how do you create design principles and what is the process behind that?
So a lot of that is around, there's different ways that people will do it. Me personally, it's, looking at that information and insight gathered. So understanding the research that's taken place, will give you insight. So if users are having problems with certain things or frustrations you find coming out of that, for example, like I touched on, being cross-sold wrong products. So, you could then look at, well, how do we want to overcome that? And that's where the definition of principles come in. And it's that thinking process at that point that I would tend to define principles. So, if I don't want to cross-sell particular products, you start looking at, where do I cross-sell products that are relative and not overwhelm them? And, that would start to form some form of principle in my head that I would probably document along the way to then, show everyone else. But that would then start to feed my design process, at least. Other things, other principles I would start looking at the way we use colors, and actually if any of those are associated with certain meanings within the design. Like something I've done recently is only using one color for a call to action because it really stands out, but then that adds prominence to it. And then other colors just being used to entice users to other sections where I want to draw attention. And actually it's, something about focused guidance within the design. And that could be then another principle that comes out of it. So I don't think there's necessarily any particular point you define principles, but they start becoming apparent as you understand research and start going through design.
Cool, thank you very much. So I think we could probably squeeze one more in. Question from Chris. How would you balance the push to digitize platforms with the needs of older users that prefer a more non-digital experience?
It's a really interesting question, because it's a hard one to answer personally, because it is something I was really dwelling on when writing this talk. You've got the older generation now, and when I say the older generation, I'm sort of referring to those maybe 70 plus, potentially 80 plus. But my other half, Nan, for example, she really is not comfortable using mobiles and gets everything wrong. So she needs that human contact, and she needs that. But then you've got somebody, our parents necessarily, or between their 50s and 60s bracket, that really are comfortable. So I think the question is more like, is that usability of those devices going to just become more apparent in our way of working, well, just our lives? And actually, because we're all growing up with it now, will the need for the physical then start to disappear a bit? I don't know the answer to that. You know, is that a thing as you grow older, you probably want more human interaction? Maybe. It's a really difficult question to answer, but you know, you still have to design with that in mind. So when I was touching on the mobile bit, you know, we can design a solution that is easy to use and things like that, but still older generations may not be comfortable entering their details on a phone because they might just feel like everyone's trying to scam them at some point. You know, it's a particular mindset they may have. So I think you've still got to be careful with where you potentially hand off to being able to speak to an advisor or things like that, so they can have that reassurance. And then, you know, there's probably still going to be the need for branches for quite a long time yet because of that as well. You know, people do feel more comfortable with human interaction sometimes, and in particular generations.
Great, thanks, Matt. I think that's just about all we've got time for today. If anyone wants to ask any questions to Matt, please get him on his Twitter, which is @methodinthemat. Or you can drop us an email here at Nomensa, and we can pass it on to Matt. Matt can get back to you. Yeah, thanks to everyone who joined us today. We have our next webinar coming up on the 23rd of March, hosted by our head of UX, Joe Knowles. So Joe's going to be exploring how we can cultivate resilience at an individual and organizational level. We also have World Information Architecture Day coming up on the 27th of this month, so please do sign up for that too. We'll be tweeting out links to both of those shortly. But yeah, thanks again for everyone that joined us. Thanks, Matt, for a great webinar, and yeah, we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening, everyone.